Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about the long-awaited, not that many people care. This is what I read in the month of May. There were 4 books that I read. Most of them very, very good. One of them kind of a letdown. So let's talk about what I read in May. I've said that twice now. All right, starting off with there's like a hole in my wall or something. One of my most anticipated books of the year, Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne, book 2 of the Bloodsworn saga. Now, here's the issue. I loved Shadow of the Gods, and I generally still love John Gwynne's novels. I didn't care too much for Of Blood and Bone, which is the sequel trilogy to Faithful and the Fallen. That aside, I'm standing in front of this. Yeah, these are the other books I read, guys. Let's go ahead and move these. Leave it up there. All right. God, it's like I've never made a YouTube video before. So Hunger of the Gods is book 2, and Shadow of the Gods, book 1, I loved when it came out. I thought it was fantastic. I absolutely loved the majority of the characters, the plots, the sort of intrigue and mystery of what was to come for Orca and these other POV characters that we were following. And Hunger of the Gods, for whatever reason, just never really clicked with me. Something that John Gwynne always does in his writing, and usually very well, is introduces a POV of a villain and or sort of gray character, chaotic neutral. Some are downright chaotic evil characters. And normally it's very, very interesting. This time around, I just didn't get very invested in, honestly, any of the POVs. Orcas felt like more of the same. Varg and some of the others were fine. A lot of the stories kind of went the direction I was expecting them to, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I don't know. There's some kind of disconnect for me with the characters in this tale this time around. Obviously, I'm going to read book 3 because I do want to see how it finishes, but I felt like a lot of the action I didn't really care about in this one. It felt kind of slow and meandering, honestly, for a lot of it. I didn't feel like it was getting to where it needed to go at a good pace, which is very surprising because typically John Gwynne is very good about getting from point A to point B in a very efficient manner. And for whatever reason, I just wasn't really connecting to it. Probably for about 60 to 70% of the book, I was not very invested. I mean, by the end, yes, as with most John Gwynne novels, it gets into a lot of battles, a lot of bloody combat, character deaths, things like that. And it was exciting to a degree, but I was so disinterested by a lot of it by the time I got to that point that I just didn't care like I normally would. I didn't think some of the newer POVs weren't the strongest, and I don't know, there was just something just wasn't clicking with me for this one. I can't really pinpoint exactly what it was. It didn't really work for me in the way that I expected it to, and that was kind of a letdown. And it's similar to how I felt in A Blood of Bone. Wow, it's similar to how I felt reading Of Blood and Bone, but more so that was because it felt like it was a retread of Faithful and the Fallen. This, being a direct sequel to Shadow of the Gods, I expected the engaging continuation of these plot threads, and it just felt, I don't know. I couldn't get invested. I'm just repeating myself at this point. His writing isn't any worse. It's the same sort of, not streamlined, but he's typically very efficient with what he's trying to get across. He's very good at writing combat. He's very good at just giving love to Norse mythology and Viking aesthetic and feeling. And I love his commitment to, using different languages and terms that you wouldn't normally hear in our language. So props to him for what I'm guessing is a lot of research into Viking history and things that would make sense in a world like this. I always enjoy his level of violence that he goes to. There is a certain type of wasp in this book that is horrifying. And of course, the good old ice spiders rear their ugly head in this book. So there's a lot of cool fantasy stuff going in this tale. Obviously, Hunger of the Gods, you see the wolf on the cover. The wolf obviously makes an appearance. Having all these big, monstrous, god-like kaijus marching around, ready to do battle is super badass and awesome. And it's kind of falling short for me, unfortunately, because of the characters this time around. Hopefully book 3 turns it around for me, but right now the trajectory is kind of going like this. So hopefully it shoots back up for the finale and it just turns it all around, because I generally like his writing a lot, and I'm hoping for good things to come. Next up, and I'm pretty sure this is the order that I read it in, Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke. Now, I believe this was 1964? Is that when it was? 1964? So this is a first contact novel, obviously. This is... Just a moment, please. Copyright 1973. I don't know where I got 64 from. In this edition, Ken Liu actually does a fantastic foreword to the novel and kind of prepares you to get in the right mindset of what to expect. This is not an action-packed novel. This is very much classic sci-fi. The characters aren't really the point. They're kind of facilitating the story to you, that you're just seeing it through their eyes. They're very much cameras, kind of showing you what's happening. I can't even tell you anyone's names that were from this book, honestly, but that's not really the point. The point is the first contact with Rama, the alien spaceship that is hurtling through space that humanity has to figure out what the hell to do with. The entire concept surrounding this rendezvous with Rama was actually really, really fascinating, and I was super engaged through the majority of this book. I loved the sort of blank slate that we get of what this thing is. It's basically a giant cylinder just barreling through space. There's not a lot of features to it. It doesn't look like a typical alien spaceship that you would think of. They don't even know what it is right away. And then when they do finally sort of, get inside and take a look around, it goes in directions I was not expecting at all. There's a lot of cool imagery that I could definitely see that would make for a very interesting adaptation. I believe this has been adapted before, at least once, if not twice, in film form. I feel like it would be relatively easy to do that, and I could really see like Denis Villeneuve and like the sheer scale and scope of his movies being perfect for this kind of material. But the story itself is really just about interpreting kind of what you're seeing and how a first contact could potentially go with some kind of alien entity, world, ship. You don't really know what to expect. It is kind of a slow burn. It's very methodical in its pacing and just sort of slowly revealing things to the reader while not really hand-holding or explaining a whole lot. There are quite a few moments in this where it doesn't just give you a direct answer, and the people involved having these discussions don't really know what they are either. So it leaves it up to the reader to sort of interpret it, take away themes, take away feelings, and invoke a lot of thought. And normally that's not my kind of sci-fi. Like I try to do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. I've tried to do, Snow Crash, and just some of these older sci-fi books just don't tend to work for me. But I really, really enjoyed this one. I thought it was very engaging and interesting and mysterious, and I just enjoyed the hell out of it. I do want to read some more Arthur C. Clarke. I will likely read Rama 2 and whatever other books are tied to this. I can't imagine it'll capture the same kind of awe and feeling from the first book, because it does. There is kind of like you can tell they're going to do another one, but I don't really know where that's going to go. If it's just going to if Rama just shows up again or another Rama shows up, but we'll see where that goes. Long story short, I love this for the most part, and it's not even held up as his sort of best work. I think it's Childhood's End is kind of up there that people praise for Arthur C. Clarke, but really, really enjoyed it. It's nice and short. It won't take very long to get through, and it makes you think. So I appreciated it a lot. Next up, I stepped back into the world of The Expanse with Cibola Burn, whatever it is called. George R.R. Martin's written on there because, Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank they're good buddies with him. So book 4 of The Expanse. So far in the series, I had kind of competed #1 spots with Leviathan Wakes and Abaddon's Gate. I didn't love Caliban's War, which is book 2, even though it introduced some of my favorite characters in the story, Avasarala obviously being one of them. But getting to book 4, I felt like there was a lot of the same kind of plot happening, where it's slowly expanding on the concept and plot that surrounds the proto-molecule, but it felt a little bit redundant, even though Abaddon's Gate does go a different direction with it. I wanted to see more than just the proto-molecule doing something again, which, yes, the protomolecule plays a big role in this story as well, in this book, but this is very much a human conflict. And that's what I enjoyed the most of this book, because you have this world that, you know, different factions are fighting over. You've got the belt, and you've got, you know, Mars and the Earth Alliance people. Like, everybody's kind of fighting over who should control this planet. And you have like the government saying, well, there's a way that we do this. We have to colonize, you know, methodically. We can't just have people going out and claiming planets, which is essentially what happens. And that spurs this big conflict over, you know, fighting over naming the planet, who actually gets to keep it and maintain the resources and use it as their world. So it's very much a human conflict, and Holden, of course, gets put directly in the middle of it, and without spoiling it, has to sort of try to figure out what the hell to do with this, and who has the better claim, what should happen, etc. I think, once again, I mean, following the crew of the Rosinante is always interesting, and I love that the rest of the crew is starting to get more and more time on the page. Hopefully we're not just focusing on Holden entirely. I want to see a lot more of the crew, because their dynamics and back and forth are really, really interesting. And what I do like about this series the most, honestly, is its ability to introduce new POVs every single book. So you always have the crew. Every once in a while you have like Avasarala or Bobby or some characters that you've previously met in other novels. And then there's 1 to 2 new POVs every single book, and it just keeps it fresh and interesting. You're always kind of getting a new cast while having a consistent cast, and that's a lot of fun. And overall, I really enjoyed the central conflict of this. There was tension, there was great dialogue, there were a lot of moments that make you think of, you know, who's right and who's wrong, and do the ends truly justify the means. Just a lot of things to think about in this one. Action in the Expanse, you know, when it happens, is always edge of your seat. And this wasn't like a big space battle. This isn't, you know, battleships fighting each other or anything like that. Like, this is boots on the ground, like human versus human conflict happening, and seeing how it plays out was just really, really engaging. And the beginning of this book really starts off with a bang, pun intended. And it was just a great jumping off point to seeing, you know, what the hell is even happening here. So I'm definitely loving the Expanse. I can't wait to continue, and I'm really looking forward to the next book. And last but certainly not least is yet another Stephen King novel. So now I've read several of these, a couple Dark Tower books, Salem's Lot, Pet Sematary. Was that it? I think that's it. Everything that I have read by Stephen King, I have liked or loved. Pet Sematary is no different. This book was great. Arthur C. Hall actually does the audiobook, which is excellent as well, so I definitely recommend checking that out. But this, I knew a lot about this book. I've always heard about it. I've always heard about the premise. What I didn't know is, in the foreword of at least this version, Stephen King writes about why he wrote this book, why it was so controversial when it was released, how he basically hid it away from himself for years because he was terrified of publishing it, because at the time he thought it was like the worst shit he's ever written, as far as like, I cannot publish this. People are going to hate me for writing something so like terrifying and monstrous, essentially. So I was like, well, that's really interesting. And I didn't know that he based it off of a real life experience that happened with him and his son. So that made it more horrifying. I had always been told that I would cry reading this book, that it would be terrifying as a parent. It definitely adds a bit of emotion to the source material, what's happening here. Because honestly, what's really interesting, and Stephen King is fantastic at this, is my kid awake? I'll talk about him in a second, because he tried to Pet Sematary himself. I'll say that much. Stephen King really understands like country folk and certain American people. So he writes very familiar types of human beings in these novels. And what I love about his writing is he wastes no time in introducing you to a character and getting you attached. The man can introduce a paragraph of a character, and I know who they are, what they believe, and I feel like I already understand them as a character. So that's exactly what he does in this novel, whether it be our main character, Lewis, or his neighbor, Judd. and his hillbilly ass accent, talking about the Rudd and all the trucks that drive him. Like the way that Arthur C. Hall does the voice is fantastic, because he just sounds like this old fat country man. It's great. But basically, when you get rolling in this story and you're following, you know, Dr. Lewis Creed and his family, who have moved to this bumfuck nowhere town right off of this road that where big, you know, 18-wheelers are just flying back and forth down the road. And you start getting introduced to the story of, you know, Judd telling him over a couple of beers that, you know, there's this pet cemetery. People have been burying their pets there for centuries or years, decades, whatever the timeline was. And people have just always done it. And of course, you start, you know, asking these questions like, what's the significance of this? Weird things start to happen. It seems like there's something mysterious or magical going on. And of course, it's a Stephen King novel. And I'm just sitting here wondering while I'm reading it, like, why is this such a horrible book to have published? Like, why is it so terrifying? Like, overstepping boundaries of like what you should do. And if anybody's unfamiliar with the general plot of it, is I'll go ahead and spoil it somewhat, of just the base premise of it is, you know, once you understand what the pet cemetery is, and people have attempted to bury pets there that come back to life more or less in some kind of zombified form. They're not quite the same. And you start getting questions about like, well, has anyone ever tried that with a human? And Judd is very quickly to shut that shit down. Like, don't ever think about that. Put that out of your mind. Like, that can't happen, right? So, of course, that's where the story eventually leads. And I'll just leave it at that. The reason this was probably so controversial and terrifying, is because Stephen King wrote this because of something that nearly happened to himself and his kid, which I'll share my own life story here in a second. Because you take your eyes off of a 2-year-old for a couple seconds and they will run into the road, which is basically what this is based off of. I didn't get a lot of horror vibes from this for a long time. It was very slow and methodical. It's really just like about this small town and the people involved in it and this family, and really just Lewis and Judd's relationship that kind of turns into like a father-son kind of bond, and just the family's talking, and like the pet cemetery is always kind of there lurking, and there's always this slow sort of dread, kind of like Salem's Lot, where it's not scary, but you slowly start to peel back the onion and you see the horror kind of creeping in, and like weird things are happening, and it's finally leading up to the holy shit, what the fuck just happened moments toward the end, where you're like, oh yeah, this is a Stephen King novel. This shit's getting wild. And it does, because goddamn, when what happens and a scalpel gets involved, I was like, holy fuck. Okay, that's what we're doing now. Yep. Okay, Stephen King. I got you, buddy. Okay. So yeah, it was great. It was a lot of fun. When the horror elements kick in, it really gets you. But it does kind of just, you know, really make you think, you know, sometimes dead is better. And that's one of the taglines that makes a lot of sense as to why sometimes you don't want to go down that road of playing God, okay? So essentially, if you know what Pet Sematary is about, I was outside playing with my son, you know, the other day, and he just, for whatever reason, in his 2-year-old little brain, decided to just take off sprinting for the street. Luckily, I'm in a cul-de-sac of my neighborhood, so there was no imminent danger, and I did get to him prior to him entering the road. But kids are morons, and they like to run into danger head first. So if you know the plot of this novel, you know where this is going. But he's fine. Okay, guys, he's okay. Everything's fine. But yeah, love it. I'm really looking forward to more Stephen King. I'm actually reading The Wastelands right now, book 3 of The Dark Tower. And of course, it's great because, I don't know, I'm going to become a big Stephen King fan. I like a lot of his work. So this has been long and overdrawn. I try to do kind of mini-ish reviews for these books to kind of catch up on my feelings on these, and which is where I was at with my reading last month. So yeah, those are the 4 books that I read. I will have my June TBR posted early next week, even though I'm already obviously reading it. I'll have finished like a book and a half by the time you see the video. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Nobody panic. Everything's okay. But that's going to do it for me, guys. Have a great weekend. Peace.